Thanks for joining us for this special election edition of the Matt Reed Show. I'm here comparing picks for our favorite candidates and positions on issue with Bill Mick, conservative host of Bill Mick Live on top-rated WMMB Radio in Melbourne. Bill, thanks for joining us here today.
Fun time of year, Matt.
How much are we going to clash today versus agree, do you think?
I think we're both going to be a little bit surprised in how much we agree. Which is, we have some points of disagreement, but we've agreed a lot here.
Now, let's be sure. Let me clarify for our viewers what exactly we're doing here, how we approached our jobs differently.
Sure.
I lead the editorial board at Florida Today. We picked a handful, relatively, of races and issues that we thought our readers would most need help with, and then dug into those issues, met with candidates and did our research, and made recommendations. As for all the other races, people can vote their consciences and do what they like. They can do what they want with our recommendations as well. We just thought we'd help. You've sat down and interviewed every single person, correct? In almost every single race?
In the races that we're covering, yes. We
Okay.
didn't cover them all, but we covered most. And we've talked to a lot of these folks. You can see the videos. If you're still voting, you can see the videos at WMMBAM.com. Just click on Brevard Political or use the keywords Brevard Political. You can watch the video interviews or you can listen to the entire hour where I had the candidates on together on the show. Well,
I think that's one of the best things you do, even getting down to the brass tacks with judge and judicial candidates.
Which is something I haven't done historically. Canon 7 of the Judicial Code of Ethics and the Florida Bar and the Supreme Court says we can't ask them, well, we can ask, they can't answer politically based questions or questions that might be issues they'd be asked to decide. As if we're supposed to pretend that these people don't have political leanings, that they don't have experience and understanding that makes them lean one way or another. We're expected to believe they are apolitical, that they set aside all of those leanings when they're on the bench. Well, we hope they can do that, but they don't trust us to be able to do that as the voter, and that disappoints me. So what I did this year is I sent a questionnaire to each of these judicial candidates before they came on in the primary season and said, highlight for me 3 to 5 of your cases that you feel are important as you seek this judicial seat. Most of them replied, all but one replied, and we interviewed them throughout the season, both political or primary and then the general. And it gave me a foundation to ask some questions that were pertinent and gave the audience some insight. So it was kind of fun, although I'm still aggravated about the Bad Lawyer Protection Act.
We'll come back to judges, Bill, because I think that's great information. Let's go to the governor's race.
Sure.
This is a big one, a negative one. I think in this race, maybe more than others, there may be a lot of people sitting on the fence deciding how they're going to hold their nose and vote. It's been so negative. How did you decide between former Governor Charlie Crist and incumbent Governor Rick Scott and anybody else who might be running, including Libertarian Adrian Wiley?
Most popular in this race is Charlie Crist's fan. Okay? No doubt, beyond any. But I looked at the records of these two men because they both have a record as governor of this state. I didn't like Charlie Crist as a Republican because I didn't believe him to be a true Republican when he was the governor. Lo and behold, I've been proved out to be right. Rick Scott is politically inept. He's not the best speaker in the world, but he's put his nose to the grindstone when it comes to jobs and trying to do what he can to revive an economy in Florida. He doesn't get all the credit for that, but he at least gets partial credit for that. When you look at their records as who is conservative, who's not, Rick Scott a lot closer to what I want than Charlie Crist ever was or ever will be. Charlie Crist will say anything to anybody to get a vote. He's been on both sides of every issue. That's the best campaign tool that the Republicans used in this race was the Charlie Crist versus Charlie Crist ads, where it had him on one side of abortion, then on the other, one side of gun control, then on the other, hating Barack Obama and loving Barack Obama. So Crist is disingenuous at best. He is a self-serving political animal. Rick Scott may be politically inept, but he's got the right ideas in mind. I went with Rick Scott here.
We went with Rick Scott for different reasons. I think we looked at the records also, but found some things that they were in favor of and were strong on different issues, or stronger than the other on different issues. For example, I think Rick Scott is better on economic development, which has been incredibly important for Brevard County. In fact, that was our difference maker at times when we were a little bit deadlocked on this issue, and also probably better on state budgeting. A little bit more careful, a little bit more of an executive outlook. That whole blow up over, we're going to cut $3 billion initially out of his budget, for education. Well, that was a result of being honest about what happens when stimulus dollars going away and starting there and having a serious,
Very true.
process. So I think the state is probably more solvent and a little bit better off fiscally under Rick Scott. I think Charlie Crist has been better on civil rights. I think he's been better on the environment, and I think he's been better on consumer protection, having vetoed some, I think, really poorly designed insurance deregulation bills that really would have socked it to homeowners in Brevard County and drained millions of dollars out of our economy at a time when we could least afford it and get nothing in return. So I think they're strong on different issues. Where they cancel each other out, to me, and to our editorial board, was on the issue of education, and that is such a pitched issue right now in Brevard. Rick Scott signed that bill, one of the first bill. It was a signature moment for him that installed this second wave of standardized testing, FCAT 2.0, merit pay, that has so many people frustrated right now. It was kind of a breaking point, I think, in this issue of standardized testing that we're seeing response and blowback from. Charlie Crist signed and passed the budgets. Remember that we're going to make your taxes drop like a rock? Well, those very same tax cuts are what caused our schools' facilities crisis today. And so I think in both ways, both candidates have caused a significant amount of stress for our local school district. They both have done some good things as well, but I don't think any candidate deserves all the praise or all of the hate on that issue. So in the end, we went with jobs in the economy and decided that Rick Scott was probably the person we'd recommend more, especially with that focus on space, funding Space Florida, investing in Port Canaveral, doing the every day, calling companies and facilitating the deals that landed these companies at Melbourne International Airport. Those are going to be big for Brevard County, and they came through at a time when we needed them most. So I think that's something to consider.
I agree, and I think you did a good job making that pick.
All right, now let's pick on one that I think we probably disagree on, and that is Amendment 2.
Oh, yeah, we disagree.
Legalizing medical marijuana in Florida. How'd you go?
Oh, I went no, absolutely no. First and foremost, this is a legislative issue, not a constitutional one. If you want, and I also think it's a Trojan horse. It's overly broad. The scope of the thing allows for prescription, if you will, of this drug for almost any reason once a physician says, okay, no problem. Well, that should be a physician decision, but it also should be distributed through a pharmacy. There are types of marijuana available legally through prescription. They say it's not as effective as the smoke version. Okay, I get it. But as you and I have talked on the show repeatedly, this opens up the door for Starbucks for stoners. This whole thing is about legalization of marijuana, period, as opposed to being medically necessary. If you want this done, do it right. Do it through the legislative process. I will not begrudge any terminally ill person the ability to use any medication that's going to make them feel better, let them eat, fix the glaucoma in their eyes, whatever it is. I don't begrudge them that, but let's do it the way that's been established through the years. You go through the pharmacological test, you put it in the pharmacy, and you distribute it like opiates. I mean, they're dangerous, but they are prescribed daily. Let's do it with this as well. Let's do it the right way. This is a smokescreen to pass, to make marijuana legal in the story.
We voted or recommended a yes vote on Amendment 2. And in this one, I think we might have gone a little bit more libertarian even than some conservative
Than me.
Our outlook on this was if we can create more personal freedom without creating a new public harm, then we should do it. And if we can give people who are hurting a relatively affordable and safe option for treating what ails them, then we should do that too. And if we're going to do both of those things, then we need to also decriminalize the doctors, the family members, and the suppliers who help them reach that point. And if people agreed with us on that case, that was our case for it, then definitely we recommended a yes vote on that. Now, where we really dug into this, because we were concerned hearing about all the supposed loopholes and the like, was what does the constitutional amendment and the language really say? And we went in there, and I think that it put our minds at rest that this wasn't going to create a lot of the big anything goes loopholes and things that I think we heard from some local critics like Dr. Stephanie Herodopoulos and Sheriff Wayne Ivey, who I think their hearts were in the right place on this issue. They believe what they believe. The biggest loophole that we heard about, for example, was that it was going to create, it was going to allow doctors to prescribe pot for any other use that they saw fit. But when we dug down into the language, we saw that there was a very clear definition there that allowed the state to control that very carefully. The doctor would have to put in writing why that doctor believed that the risk or the benefits of the medical marijuana would outweigh the potential harm. And in the meantime, that doctor remains licensed, that doctor remains overseen by the state. If the state wants to come calling because they hear that this guy's handing out certifications like candy, then he's got to turn over that paperwork, and if it looks like he's been playing games, they can pull his license. I think the other issue that I was concerned about, in fact, I'm the one I think originally who shared that term on your show, is the Starbucks for stoners, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm from California, and I just thought it was tacky, and I was concerned about that. But what we've seen in places like Cocoa Beach is that local governments have all of the right in the world in Florida to regulate what they look like and where they can open, and how they work. Can you smoke on premises or not? Granted, I think that's a legitimate concern, is what do these places look like and function like, but I think we have the power to make them not the problem that I think some people have foreseen. But I understand why other people might be turned off by this proposal. Mm-hmm. We just looked at it on the merits and decided it was an okay idea.
60%. How many other drugs are in the Constitution of Florida? I think you'll find none. And it's 60% to pass it and 60% to change it if it does pass. It becomes a huge problem if it is not what you're saying and if it is what I'm saying. Let's do it through the legislative channel. Let's do it right. If you can't muster the support for it that way, I've got a real problem with how we try to legislate through the Florida Constitution. It's not what it's designed to do, yet we do it with pregnant pigs and 4-year-old pre-K and other things.
I don't have a problem with it anymore. You know what? I've listened to that.
Because you're a California guy, yeah.
Listen, it is the only mechanism in Florida for citizens to essentially create law by referendum. If we had a different way, a third way, like California or some other states, I think that's probably what we'd do, but we can only do it through the Constitution. It's the
well, then we
people's
need to change it
Constitution,
to a
not the
referendum system.
legislatures.
If we changed it to a referendum system, the argument would be a little more moot. But with this being a constitution, it's about form and function of government. It's not about specific legal things, like which drug should be on the pharmacology list.
Sure. I will just say this. I've been to the Constitution in Florida. I've read it, expecting to see a nightmare of pregnant pigs and drift nets, and what I found was not very much. It was actually a pretty quick read, not too hard to figure out, and mostly filled up with pet tax projects proposed by state legislators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do that a lot.
So, all right, let's move on to the next one. I think I know you're going to go in this based on your take on amendments and whether they're the right way to go. But Amendment 1, this is the thing that ties together conservation and essentially real estate taxes as development happens. Your thoughts?
Not so much a constitutional issue for me, although that's still in there. My problem is that we need to get the state and our counties out of the land buying business. They're proposing taking lands off of the state tax rolls. They're proposing on paying for this with 1/3 of the money that currently is paid for dock fees when there's property transferred. What's that money fund now? What's going to go unfunded if all of a sudden we're taking that money and we're buying land with it? The better way to do this would be to incentivize the private property owner through tax breaks or other methods to properly care for and maintain the property, as opposed to the state taking it off its hands, and then it's not usable for anything.
That's a good argument. Actually, I don't entirely disagree with you, but we did go and endorse this in favor, seeing it as a wise thing to do for sustained growth, to tie increases in the real estate development and sales to even more set-asides for potential clean water and the kinds of things that we would need to really to serve that new growth. So we saw it as a long-term smart growth thing and went for it. And but again, I think this is one that
Sadly,
Not
historically,
as controversial.
I think most of these amendments tend to pass. People tend to vote yes on them without really thinking. We've got, sadly, all too often, a large part of the electorate that is basically uneducated on this, and they see this on there, and the first thing they see is yes, and they vote it. And I would rather them stay away and not vote if they don't know. I would like people to engage more and be more informed, which is why we did the segment we did on the show yesterday. We had Monique Miller in for 2 hours talking about these amendments and the ballot referendums in Brevard County. And just to give people an opportunity to hear about them. Whether they agree or disagree, unimportant to me, but at least learn the issues and then make your decision based on something other than, okay, that says yes, I'll go with it. And we see too much of that.
The one thing I am glad that we do in Florida is that we made it a 60% threshold, and we put information on there about the potential cost to the public about voting.
See, I think
against
that's
these
deceptive in this case, though, because when you take that third of the money from the dock fees away, and from whatever else they're already funding, whether it be courts or clerk's offices or what it may be, you're taking that third of that money away and putting it into buying land. How do you recoup the money you need to fund those other services? There'll be another tax somewhere in play. Got to be careful there.
All right, let's go local now.
Okay.
County Commission.
All right.
Couple of hot races in District 2, which is Central Brevard, Merritt Island, Cocoa Beach, Cocoa, Rockledge, and District 4, which is South Brevard, but it's Vieira, Suntree, Satellite Beach, Indian Harbor Beach, North Melbourne, Pineda area.
Right.
I think I probably can guess how you went in District 4 for South Brevard. Who is your pick in South Brevard?
One of my dearest friends, Kurt Smith. He formerly owned Mako on 192 in West Melbourne, owned that business for over 25 years, is a pragmatic, smart businessman. He's a conservative. We go to church together every Sunday, have breakfast every Sunday after church. We vacation together, do the jet ski thing together. We are very close friends, and I respect Kurt and his pragmatic look at the issues. He is a conservative, but he's also a businessman and knows things have to get done. You don't change things necessarily overnight. And I think the voice he brings to the commission is going to be one of leadership, whether he sits as the chair or whether he's one of the 5 sitting on the board itself. He brings a common sense approach that we need on this board. We haven't had it in some time, and I'm excited about the prospect of him being elected here.
We also recommended Kurt Smith for District 4. He wasn't our initial endorsement in that race, and we I think in the primary went with Greg Jones.
Right.
He just had a lot more elected experience, and that impressed us. In this case, of the picks, now I did make a case for considering George Leibovitz, one libertarian of the bunch that we had to choose from this year, but in the end we settled and decided that Kurt Smith would be a good choice. We like conservative leadership in county. We just prefer that it be practical and we could do without a lot of the drama, right? And we liked his work ethic, his small business experience. We liked some of his practical ideas for running more street sweepers, for example, and getting pollutants and crud out of the Indian River. I think that's great. And he also had some good long-term outlooks on things that are interesting if phased in carefully, like accounting for the life cycle of equipment. Government doesn't really do that. You have to set a lot of money aside. It's a bit less money for services. But if done with a good fiscally responsible county manager and you do it and you're patient, you can get that done and it could make a big difference.
I think that's key, and I was not a fan of the way Stockton Whitten was placed as the lady in waiting for that county manager job, but I've been impressed with Stockton since he took the job. He is vocal with these commissioners. He gives them information when it appears they didn't have it and they're about to make a decision going the wrong way. He will pull an item and get more information, or he will tell them where they're about to go the wrong way. And I think that meshes very well with the leadership style you're going to see out of Kurt Smith, that you're also going to see out of Jim Barfield in District 2. I know we're going to get there in a minute, but I think this is very positive for this commission and for the county. The long-term planning aspect is something we've not seen in action. And given an opportunity to work, I think it does bode well for all of us.
Long-term fiscal plan. Boy, we can
Absolutely.
sure plan growth and new subdivisions all over the place, but we don't have very long-term fiscal plans, and I think that could be interesting. Let's go to District 2, Central Brevard. We endorsed Jim Barfield, the Republican in that race. We also endorsed him in the primary. Seemed like he had the best ideas for overseeing contracts, keeping taxes low, asking the right questions of budgets, but also seemed to have a real lifelong residents' appreciation for quality of life here. How'd you go?
I went with Jim Barfield in the general. In the primary, I was behind Michael Hartman. I thought Michael was a bit more conservative, a bit more fiscally ready to take this job on. Jim, being a newcomer to politics, as was Michael, was just not quite where I wanted him to be. I had some questions about his political history, his alignment with the Economic Development Commission. If he doesn't get elected on Tuesday, he's the next president of the EDC. I don't like the way the EDC's gone in the last 2 or 3 years. He's obviously been a part of that. He has acknowledged there are tweaks that need to be made, though. And along with Kurt, this commission will see a change that it hadn't seen in my time covering Brevard. And with Kurt and Jim Barfield and Trudy as 3 solid conservative votes. And I believe Jim is the conservative he says he is. Now it's up to us to hold him to that. And I want to see them work together to bring this commission more in line with how it spends money and how it deals with the EDC on some of these issues. And I believe we're going to see that, and I'm excited about that. So I did go with Jim Barfield in District 2.
I would say also that you might see Kurt Smith and Jim Barfield, who have long business experience as the heads of business and making payroll, and actually probably working pretty well with Robin Fisher.
Absolutely.
Who also is a businessman and knows how to deal with some of these contracts and fiscal issues.
And there will be political differences. There will be
there
political
have to be.
Well, why do you think that the commission acted as it did over the last month or so with the EDC and the smoke and mirrors on, well, it's not a contract, it's an agreement. It's not an agreement for service, it's a grant or whatever. Then they do the All Aboard Florida thing just a week ago before this new commission has a chance to take hold. If you had this commission in place and the All Aboard Florida discussion came about, I think we'd have got much more out of All Aboard Florida than we did in last week's commission meeting. I think it would have made that big a difference, and the train people were in a hurry to get it done before the new commission got seated. I think that sends a message loud and clear, and that's a good one.
Interesting. Let's talk about a couple of issues that I know have been hot ones. The proposed half-cent sales tax for critical school facilities. I know this is one that had the potential for big disagreement between us, but how did you come down on that?
I ended up voting for the half-cent sales tax.
Really?
Shock, shock. And it's not so much that I believe the schools have handled themselves well, because I believe they haven't. I believe there's been extravagant spending. I believe there's been problems with how they've managed their dollars. But I also think there's a big chunk of the responsibility that falls to the Florida legislature with unfunded mandates coming to Brevard County. And they aren't set up and weren't ready for that type of mandate coming from Tallahassee. The board has done some things as they prepared for this tax that are better than they've done in the past. They initially wanted this tax for 10 years. I was screaming, you got to make it 4. You don't have a prayer pass on it if it's 10. I will be the lead campaigner against it if it's 10. They cut it to 6 instead of 4. Not what I wanted, but it was a step in the right direction. I've also seen Andy Ziegler, and we may talk about school board races in a minute, but I've seen Andy and others work really hard to try to save money in areas where they can. And I respect the effort. This was not a vote that I cast easily. It was one I cast with some trepidation. If they are not fiscally responsible, if they don't spend this on the things that it needs to be spent on, if they don't follow the list that they published, if they start any new program, much less one that's a pie-in-the-sky, throw money away program, they won't get the renewal in 6 years, and I'll be the chief campaigner against it and no new taxes ever again. I'm willing to give them a shot because I see that these schools are in need, and that they are not repairing systems until they're broken and not working. That needs to change. Better management at the school board level will be part of that. And same thing with their benefits. They need to get a new benefits administrator because they don't understand benefits and they're costing them millions of dollars a year. They need to fix those problems. And if they do, and we see that fiscal responsibility, you may see me advocate for this renewing in 6 years. But we'll have to wait and see.
Well, we, after lots of research on this issue, to determine that there really is a crisis, that their finances are a mess, that they could do without the tax, but only if they continue to drain money out of classrooms and instruction and activities and that kind of thing. We went ahead and endorsed a yes vote on the school tax for many of the reasons that you cited, especially that there are safeguards in there in terms of the list, an oversight board, and that there's an expiration date after 6 years.
Sure.
We've got just a couple of minutes left.
Time flies, huh?
Let's compare really quickly. School board, District 2, Central Brevard. We've endorsed John Craig.
I went with Keith Yarbrough. I like both of these candidates. I think they are both well-intentioned. I think they have the best interests of the schools at heart. Yarbrough's closer philosophically aligned to me than John Craig is. And he's a wonderful guy. Met his wife a couple of weeks ago. She's a fantastic lady. I like these people. They're good people. Either will serve well. Yarbrough's closser philosophically to me, so that's where I cast my vote.
He was against the tax,
Yep.
and more fiscally conservative.
And willing to speak up.
Probably one of the most fiscally conservative candidates I've heard in this year's, of any race this year.
Yeah.
We thought John Craig had a great strategic outlook on things and a good fit. We think he'd be a pretty good fit.
District 5.
District 5, right? Now, our endorsement didn't change from the primaries when we endorsed Andy Ziegler. Denise Coyle should be commended for being a great children's advocate, but we just thought Andy Ziegler had a experience and professionalism that had served the district well in his first terms.
I didn't have this race in the primary. I didn't cover it. There were some folks in the race that just don't know how to talk to the public and are throwing bombs rather than campaigning to be elected. And I didn't like it at all. What I do like is the work Andy Ziegler's put in. He wasn't my favorite guy when he got elected, but I've seen him work. I've seen him understand budgets. I've seen him bring in pros like David Brooks on the insurance issue where they can actually save millions of dollars. Andy's worked to be good at this job, and while we disagree on some things, I appreciate and respect the work ethic, and I voted there.
All right, we've got just about 30 seconds left.
Okay.
Why don't you tell me, just tick them off, who did you wind up, after your interviews, picking for judge?
Judge Group 13, I like both George Polk and Christina Sanchez. I endorsed or voted Polk in the primary. I'll vote Christina Sanchez in the general election. I liked her answers this time
Lots
around.
of trial experience.
Group 19, Donna Gorner did not make it through the primary. She was my pick then.
She was board certified, a good attorney.
Mitch Krause, Susan Stacy, the most contentious race of any except the Scott-Christ race. And they don't like each other. They threw bombs at each other. And I went with Mitch's experience, although I like Susan Stacy's demeanor. It's just one of those things. In Circuit Judge Group 23, John Moser got my vote there. I like his experience. I like his demeanor. And I think he will do an excellent job on the bench. That's where I went.
Well, thank you, Bill, for interviewing all those judicial candidates, and thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me.
Good
It's always
luck on
fun.
Election Day.
We'll see how it goes.